The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Democrats have been sworn into the new Congress. Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi is the new Speaker of the House, third in line for the presidency, of course, behind Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Democrats now in control of the House, and within just hours of being sworn in, Democrats successfully passed a bill to end the Trump government shutdown. Now, unfortunately, the bill is dead in the water in the Senate and with Donald Trump because, number one, it does not contain funding for Donald Trump's border wall, which Mexico was going to be paying for. And number two, because both Trump and Mitch McConnell have said they can't reopen government on the basis of a Democratic bill because they would look bad, exposing that they are just playing the worst politics that Washington is a purveyor of. And when you look at the package that was passed by the House, mostly along party lines, 239 to 192, this bill would end the shutdown by temporarily funding the Department of Homeland Security at its current levels for a little over a month. And it would allow discussions to continue about a longer term plan for what's going to be done. It would not, as I mentioned, fund the border wall at all. Good for Democrats for not budging on that whatsoever. Then, in addition to this bill, Democrats also put together another measure to get the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, and a bunch of other departments reopened and funded through September 30th, 2/3 of 2019. They approved that one 241 to 190 by a slightly bigger margin than they approved the Homeland Security bill. What is fascinating about this, and really maybe disgusting and vile is a better word, is that it exposes the politics being played. Because the bill to fund Homeland Security that Democrats approved yesterday in the House is almost identical to the one that the Republican-controlled Senate adopted with a voice vote last month, except the next day they rejected it and forced the shutdown that we're now dealing with. The same plan is now approved in the House, but Republicans in the Senate aren't even going to consider it based on what we know right now. Mitch McConnell is actually trying to do something clever. He's been trying to sort of get out of the way, let Trump and Democrats talk about the wall funding and getting this back open whenever it is they decide to do it. And in a sense, it worked to push some blame to Democrats for this shutdown, but it's starting to fail now because Republicans in the Senate are starting to ramp up their 2020 campaigns. Remember that every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. In 2020, it's many Republicans. Now, a lot of them are in red states. That means that there are lots of safe seats for Republicans, but in total, Republicans have many seats to defend in 2020. And a shutdown that goes on longer and longer is not going to be good for some of those Republican senators who are in either swing states or in states that Hillary won in 2016. You can see the calculations being made here. And the calculations are not about what actually secures the border or what is best for immigration. The calculations that these swing state Republicans are making are political calculations. Case in point, Cory Gardner, Republican senator in Colorado. He has this uphill battle in 2020, one of the most at-risk Republican seats. And lo and behold, he now is saying we should actually reopen government without border wall funding. He's quoted in the New York Times as saying, I think we should pass a continuing resolution to get the government back open. Susan Collins, we've talked about her role in the fiasco of the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court confirmation, Republican from Maine. She is a target in 2020 because of her role in the Kavanaugh fiasco. She now is saying, oh, you know what? It would actually be fine to separate funding for the Department of Homeland Security from funding for the border wall and just getting government reopened. So when the rubber meets the road, Pat, it's just political considerations. They all know what the calculation is. They are making it for 2020, not for border security.
Yeah, generally speaking, there's no more incentive for politicians to get along and compromise anymore. But there are exceptions to that rule. Like, you have to eventually get the government back open. And there are those Republicans in purple states who are going to have to find some solution so they can hold on to their seats. So we're going to have to find some way out of this. I think it's going to be maybe a couple $2 billion put towards border security, not necessarily a wall, but that could be the place where Democrats meet Republicans in the middle, and that could be the solution to getting the government back open.
That may be, but I do want to mention, as far as Gardner and Collins are concerned, they may just be playing coy here with their purple state Republican constituents. So until they actually vote on something, even if they say they support reopening government, even that could in and of itself just be posturing. But the important message here is none of them actually care about the issue at hand. Trump's border wall, one way or the other, if the political ramifications are good for them, is actually not that important, whether it gets built or not. I mentioned on yesterday's show that there's an opinion piece in the Los Angeles Times by John Wiener, which says that 2019 is going to be the worst year of Donald Trump's life. We now know that Trump's personal and political and professional lives all appear to contain criminality. They are all under investigation, and it's very quickly going to get much worse because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, House Democrats have been sworn into power with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House after huge wins, quite frankly, in the 2018 midterm elections. The new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, third in line for the presidency, said in an NBC interview with Savannah Guthrie in the last 48 hours, I played it yesterday, she's not ruling out impeachment nor indictment of President Donald Trump. Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler from New York, the new chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, said that House Democrats will use their subpoena power if necessary to get the answers that they want to get. Investigations are very quickly launching in this new House into Trump's targeting of immigrants and migrants, into adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. Congressman Elijah Cummings is looking into the security clearance fiasco involving Michael Flynn and Jared Kushner and many others. Cummings, along with Congressman Peter DeFazio, will be looking into Trump's involvement in not moving the FBI headquarters as part of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. You then have the House Ways and Means Committee already starting to work on obtaining Donald Trump's tax returns, something I'd be very interested in looking at. And note that this is all separate from Russia investigations happening at the criminal and political levels into the Trump Tower meeting, campaign finance violations, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Everything I'm mentioning today, Pat, is separate from the storm that is starting to now rain down on Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. I do think that we're going to learn quite a lot because the House is going to have resources at their disposal that members of the media don't necessarily have, so we can learn a lot of new information. Question is, though, is it going to move the needle? Is it going to affect Trump supporters at all and make him less popular in the polls?
We don't know, and the answer is maybe not, and that's why we need to ignore them. And no matter what happens with any of these investigations, the time that we have to do activism is far better spent getting people to vote who are already sympathetic to our side, the side of reason and logic and morality and common sense, than trying to convince Trumpists, because many of them are a lost cause. And then lastly, by the way, the emoluments clause to the Constitution of the United States, Trump receiving things of value from foreign powers, that's an entirely unique and separate line of inquiry, which is also going to be undertaken. It is really difficult, as Pat is pointing out, to get presidents to face consequences for their actions. But if it's going to happen, this is a great opportunity for it. One of the most criminal administrations in a very long time, now being subject to the investigative power of the opposing party, which has taken control of the House of Representatives. And notably, we may get to see transcripts from the congressional testimony given during the last Congress by Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Roger Stone. What did they say? How much did they lie based on the information we've gotten since their testimony? Adam Schiff says he is interested in releasing some of those transcripts. I hope we get them. These are going to be very, very interesting 2 years. What are you most looking forward to under this new democratically controlled House? Let me know on Twitter at @DPacman. Also, make sure to follow the show on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a quick thank you to today's new member of the day, Daniel Singleton, and today's sustaining member of the day, long time with us, almost 5 years, Lauren Caprio. Daniel and Lauren, thank you for your support. This year is a setup year for 2020, and we need to build our support faster than has ever been able to do so before, to take a page out of George W. Bush's phraseology. Sign up at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code This Is 2020 is available. It'll save you 40% if you want it. Okay, I've got some interesting follow-up on the Stefan Molyneux situation. Stefan Molyneux is an online conspiracy theorist type dude. He is also, I guess, under the guise of being an empiricist, a race realist, as they are sometimes called, who is not going to shield us from sometimes unfortunate realities about the differences in IQ on the basis of race or whatever. Anyway, he's become way more brazen lately in his white supremacy, white nationalism type of stuff, and he's been disguising it much less than usual. He usually will disguise it as pure science, but as I told you last month, here's one example of how he has spoken against white nationalism, but he's an empiricist and Poland is all white, and it was really great when he visited. Take a look.
You know, I go to Poland, what is it, 99% white? I don't need any security. The streets are incredibly clean. Crime is almost non-existent. Nobody gets called a racist. There's no talk of white privilege. No identity politics, no endless diversity nagging. You know, I've spoken against white nationalism, but I'm an empiricist.
Right.
I'm an empiricist. I went to the country. I saw how it was like.
Yeah. So anyway, there's that. And then he and I got into a little bit of a Twitter thing when he tweeted in early December, "My ancestors were driven out of Africa and struggled to survive winter and hunger. Over thousands of years, they became smarter and wiser through suffering. They made the modern world. Now the Africans say we are privileged and thieves. No, suffering made us. No more guilt." And I responded to him, "Can we now say you are a white supremacist? Isn't it time to stop dancing around it?" So I tweeted that, and then it got like a bunch of thousands of likes, and he started attacking me even further on Twitter. He went on and on tweeting a bunch of different stuff, including, I think we have one example of what he tweeted to me, or do we not? No, we already showed it. Yes, here it is. "Wow, you're ignorant of basic facts. These same environmental pressures cost East Asians to have a higher average IQ than whites. It's now official. You post confidently without a shred of knowledge, Dunning-Kruger in the flesh." So this is a common refrain, actually, for white supremacists, which is they say, we can't really be white supremacists because Asians have even higher IQs. So there. So I thought that was kind of the end of it. But Britt, one of our viewers, advised me during my YouTube live stream earlier this week that Stefan has been mentioning me a bunch of times on his channel, and I had no idea. And he's weaving this narrative that once he confronted me with some kind of facts on Twitter, I vanished because I was just so defeated intellectually or something, I guess. So here's one example of what Stefan has been saying.
I did have, I guess, a bit of a run-in. I'll just do this very, very briefly with David Pakman. And I mentioned this before, but, you know, he was implying that I was some sort of white supremacist. And so it wasn't that hard. I just found some Jewish lawmaker who said that the Jews were the master race and blah, 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 blah. And I said, oh, here's a real guy. You know, I've never said anything like this. So let's get together and explain. Of course, he vanished, right? Jewish in-group preference. Never seen that before.
So let's see if I understand. He found a Jewish supremacist in another country who has only one shared characteristic with me, which is that I'm also Jewish. And that somehow is supposed to prove that Stefan Molyneux is not a white nationalist or a white supremacist. It's sort of a weird thing for someone who claims to be all about sound and valid arguments to say he can't be a white nationalist or white supremacist because a guy I don't know in Israel who's Jewish thinks that Jews are the master race. So that's very weird to begin with. Then Brett Weinstein from the intellectual dark web was also involved in pointing out that Molyneux is basically off the deep end with this stuff. And then in another segment, Molyneux mentions both Brett Weinstein and me once again.
I'm pretty sure that, I don't know about Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin, but I did have a bit of a tangle fest with Brett Weinstein and, what's his name? David Pac-Man, which is kind of a funny name, but anyway, because they were, Brett Weinstein on Twitter was kind of calling my argument stupid about race and IQ, ethnic differences, human biodiversity, and so on. And so I got a little, I've had this kind of don't engage philosophy for quite some time, but post-Poland, I'm like, the high road kind of leads off a cliff.
So what he says is that since witnessing how great the white ethno-state of Poland is and seeing how good things are there when it's just white people, he has chosen, instead of not engaging in these debates online, he has chosen to start calling out people who I guess don't like his white nationalism. And then later in this same live stream, he points out that, hey, after all, I'm Jewish. So yeah, there's that.
I think it was Dave Pac-Man, who's Jewish, was something like, why don't you just call yourself a white supremacist or whatever it is? And this white supremacy thing is kind of boring. It's so stupid. I mean, if you love your own wife, it doesn't mean that you think your own wife is supremacist to everyone else. You hate everyone else's wife. You hate all women. It's just, And of course, when it comes to the IQ stuff, given that whites kind of float somewhere in the middle, the idea that it's a supremacist measure is kind of ridiculous. But what I did with David Pac-Man was I said, and it's not that hard to find, right? So I looked up and I found a Jewish lawmaker, right, in Israel, who had basically said that Jews were the master race, Jews were the best, the Jews were superior to all the other races. And so I tweeted at him, at David Pac-Man, and I said, wow, I really hate ethnic supremacists too. So this guy's like, he's pretty influential. He's pretty powerful. This guy's a lawmaker in Israel, and he's an ethnic supremacist. Let's get the word out. Let's try and take him down. And what do you think happened from there? Radio silence, of course. Radio silence.
So he seems to be trying to make the analogy that just liking being white is no different than liking your wife. It doesn't mean that everybody's worse than your wife or that everybody's worse if they're not white. But that's not actually what started all of this. He said, I went to Poland, and even though I've spoken against white nationalism, I'm an empiricist, and things are just much better when it's all white people. Now, whatever tweet he says he sent me, I didn't see, but it doesn't matter, because what difference does it make that he found a Jewish supremacist in Israel? How does that in any way have a bearing on his argument? If I say, hey, look, you're white, Stefan, and there's this white Congressman, Steve King, who's a white nationalist in the United States. So what? What is that? What bearing does that have on any of this stuff? And then we get to the best moment of the entire thing. Stefan starts reading comments from a viewer who says something along the lines of Weinstein and Pac-Man. That sounds like a Cohen incidence, which of course, Cohen being a common Jewish last name, a Cohen incidence is what a coincidence that Jews are saying this to you. And then this is just the best. Molyneux says, hey, you guys have to really cool it with the Jewish question, not because it's hugely anti-Semitic, but because there's a better approach to dealing with so-called Jewish supremacy, which is just to get better at stuff and start defeating the Jews.
Pac-Man and Weinstein must be another Cohen incidence. So, yeah, I mean, people always like, and you guys got to cool it on the Jewish question stuff. Like you really, really do. I mean, I've certainly talked about it a number of times, but just do better. Just improve and do better. And if you feel some other group is superior or is dominating things, then just up your game. If there's another team that continually beats your team, I guess you can get mad at the other team, or you can just train harder yourself. And so I don't know. It's very passive and it's very empty to complain.
So understand, the Jewish question is a term, sometimes also called the Jewish problem, with hugely anti-Semitic connotations dating back to about the 1880s, and it was dealt with by the Nazis. The Nazis dealt with the Jewish question with something called the final solution to the Jewish question. Using the term the Jewish question as a legitimate term is like saying, I wouldn't focus so much on the fag problem. I would just try to be better than them, right? Using the term is pretending that this is a legitimate and reasonable term to use. You're actually building up the problem by even using that term. So anyway, this is what we're dealing with Stefan Molyneux. There he is in his full glory. Apparently, I thought this ended on December 5th, but apparently the last month has seen a whole bunch of other stuff that I didn't see, and I'm glad Britt called to my attention. Send me your thoughts. Follow me on Instagram at david.pacman. We'll take calls next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, let's go to the phones for the first time in 2019 and see what's on people's minds. 617-830-4750. Why don't we start with, where do we start? Let's maybe start with the 646 area code. Caller from 646. Who's this? Where are you calling from? What's on your mind today?
Hi, Dave. This is Dominique. I've called before. I'm the French girl from New York City living in Oklahoma.
What's going on?
And, okay, I just wanted to ask you something. I'm sure you've noticed this too. When I look at Canada and Europe, whether it be my country, France, or Scandinavia, England, or even New Zealand and Australia, they tend to be like social democracies with a bit of some programs that are democratic socialist programs. You know, like in Germany, they have cooperatives. Why is it that in those countries, the politicians work realizing that if you have an inflation rate, people should be paid at that inflation rate so that they don't starve and they don't struggle and they can come to work and be healthy? But why is it that American politics and American politicians seem to view this whole political system in the United States as a get-rich scheme?
Well, they see, do they see it as a get-rich scheme? I mean, in other words, they have benefited from it, and so they see it as having worked to their advantage. But I think that that's kind of the problem, which is if they saw it as a, quote, get-rich scheme for everybody, and if it actually worked for everybody, maybe that wouldn't actually be so bad. But the problem is it's for their self-enrichment only.
Right, exactly. Right, and that's what I don't understand. I mean, you know, how could you have, look, if you paid people properly $15 an hour, $16 an hour, or depending on the region in the USA, depending on the inflation rate of that state and that city, if you have happy workers, they will work better, they will be more productive, and they will make you more money. But for some reason, in the United States, there's this attitude. And, you know, with Brazil's election, I'm sure this lunatic has the same attitude. You know, Barcelona, whatever his name is. The idea is to keep people repressed and struggling and suffering. You know, you got to make it on your own, and if not, you know, even if you pay taxes, it doesn't matter. You're a lazy bum. You're trying to live off the government. So basically, you should just work and pay taxes to make them rich.
Yeah, but at the same time, they say that they want to lower taxes, but at the same time, they depend on those taxes to fund the system, which has allowed them to succeed in their self-enrichment. Yeah, it's a vicious circle. Dominique, thank you. Great to hear from you in the new year. I appreciate it. Let's go next to our caller from the 210 area code. Caller from 210, where are you calling from? Who's this?
Yes, this is Joshua from San Antonio.
Hey, what's going on, Joshua?
Hey, just one quick question. What do you think of memes? You like memes?
Sorry, what do I think of what?
Meme?
What do I think of what?
Meme. Like a meme?
What do I think of memes?
Yeah.
Which memes?
Oh, I was just asking because I was just going to ask if you think the left can meme.
I think the left can meme with the best of them, Joshua.
All right. Well, I was just asking because it's a common talking point that I hear on very in right-wing centers, and I hear people say, well, the left can't meme, the left can't meme. You know what I'm saying?
You know, I think that that's crazy. I think that if we think of memes as satire, I think there's one side that has shown us to not be able to produce nor understand satire, and it's the right. And all you have to do is look at Donald Trump's Twitter and his followers' Twitter as Saturday Night Live is airing. And I think you very quickly understand that if there is a meme deficit, if there is a satire deficit somewhere, it's not happening on the left, my friend.
Definitely. Thank you. I love the show.
Okay, Joshua, thank you so much. Glad we were able to quickly address that one. Let's go to Ilan from Boston, who has called in before and has had some disagreements with me. What's going on, Ilan? Ilan, you might have us muted because we can't hear you, but you are on. If you unmute, we might be able to hear you. Otherwise, I'll have to move on.
Me, is it?
Hello?
Is this me?
That's you.
Oh, I don't know what you heard last time I called, but my name is Eli.
Eli, I heard Ilan. Okay, we will correct that.
Sorry, my phone doesn't have the best microphone. Anyway, I just had a quick question, and it's not about disagreements with, well, I'm not here to call you out this time. Let me put it that way.
All right.
So I've noticed that some people commenting on your YouTube videos claim that some of your views on foreign policy, or maybe specifically Israel, are more to the right of most progressives, but they aren't usually backed up or sourced. They don't usually have a link to another video where you talk about it. Are these guys just trolling to make me think that you're, on the opposition of some of what progressives believe, or do they have a point? What do you think about that?
Well, I would just say point to the policy, right? I mean, point to the policy, or even now that you're on the phone with me, Eli, ask me a particular policy question, because it's sort of like, I don't know what we gain by saying, here's people labeling you. Do you accept or deny the label? Really, it's all policy, right? So let's drill down. Sure. What would be a policy question?
Well, I guess specifically, what are your thoughts on the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians and the Gaza Strip and what's going on there?
You're saying, are you talking about the Netanyahu administration specifically and what they've done, or do you mean the broader security situation in Israel?
Specifically Netanyahu.
Yeah, I mean, I'm against Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't support Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a right-winger. He is in bed and in a coalition with some of the most extreme religious right elements of Israeli government. And I think that not only has he made no strides toward peace, I don't even have any reason to think for a second that he has any interest in doing that, because he doesn't have anything to gain if there are serious peace negotiations. He benefits, and we've seen from the election games he's played with security games, he benefits from people being in a state of mind where they want the most extreme sort of right-wing aggression from the Israeli government. So I oppose Benjamin Netanyahu's administration.
Thank you. Can I ask one quick other question unrelated?
Sure.
So I saw a video the other day of a woman who called in wanting to talk about some billions of dollars in fraud that was happening by some financial institution. Did you ever follow up?
It was a sad call, yeah.
Did you ever follow up by email or something?
No, I mean, I said she could email me the stuff if she wanted to, but she didn't. And, the sort of consensus was that's someone who's dealing with some emotional issues,
Well, I hope she's all right. Thank you for picking up my call.
All right, Eli, we will get your name corrected in the caller ID. Eli, not Ilan. Thank you for the correction. Okay, let's go to the 708 area code. Caller from 708. Who is this?
Hello, David. This is Barry again. I called you like a couple months ago.
Okay, sorry. So you've got a terrible signal. I didn't hear your name. Did you say it was Barry?
Yes, it's Barry. I'm sorry. Can you hear me better?
Oh, we're not on speaker or Bluetooth, are we?
Oh, we're on Bluetooth. Do I need to take you off?
Okay, yes. Let's not do the Bluetooth thing today, please.
Okay.
We'll put you into our system as Barry Bluetooth. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a question about education and primary education, because I work with seventh graders. I work for this AmeriCorps program called City Year. And so I've been working with seventh graders, and I work with a teacher who has 4 classes of 40 seventh graders. And it's like a terrible system. Most students don't turn in their work. And I mean, a lot of times on the show and on Cal's show, we talk about college a lot, but we don't talk about primary education because I think that the primary education system is failing. I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a system that is persistently underfunded. It pits factions that should be cooperating against each other around the failures of both compensation and negotiating power. And in the end, it's the kids that lose. So I think the system at its core has some problems. In addition to that, though, I do think that there are curricula issues, and we're not, I mean, generally, before college, people should be getting educations in critical thinking, in philosophy, and in so many other things that they're just not getting. So I'm going to let you go. It's crazy in the background, but yes, primary education, public education. I appreciate the call. Thank you, Barry. And it's an issue we will definitely deal with again. Let's go to the 908 area code. Caller from 908. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going, Mr. Pac-Man? My name's Paul. Happy New Year, by the way.
Thank you, Paul. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
I just had a quick question about the Trump bug, because obviously we all seen the Trump bug, and it's spreading through the right, and we've seen it trickle down a little bit to the left, but now it's even to the new progressive left with Rashida Tlaib. We've seen her just recently use the foul language while making a speech. Do you think that's potentially damaging to the political climate of the new left?
Okay, so let's break that down into a couple pieces. When you say you've seen the Trump bug spread to the right and then to the left, do you mean being in favor of Trump or being against Trump?
No, the attitude, the Trump attitude, as I guess saying that he doesn't mind what he says. He says whatever he wants, and we've seen him get away with it. So,
okay,
just wondering what you think of the new left or the new progressive left.
So let's take the example
Tlaib.
you gave. You're talking about Rashida Tlaib, and what is it that she said?
She said that, I don't want to use foul language on your show, but she said we're going to impeach this mother effer.
Oh, listen, I don't care about. So okay, I have problems with Rashida Tlaib, and they have to do with her political positions. She's part of and identity politics. She's part of a left that I don't identify with, but I don't care about swearing. I mean, I've said before, swearing's just not a big deal. I'm from Argentina. People swear on TV there. It's just not a huge deal. It's not taboo. I have no. The question for me is not that she said let's impeach this MFer. My problem is that she is not being clear about what information she's using to make the assessment that he's going to be impeached. Like, defend the impeachment part, not the. I have no problem with the language that she used.
Okay. All right. Well, so you don't have a problem with the language. You just wish that she would be more specific instead of using her emotion. Be more professional about the way she approaches.
No, I'm not even saying anything about her professionals. I'm just saying if you are an elected a member of Congress, and I'm guessing that she said this before she was sworn in yesterday, or was it after the swearing in?
I think it was when she was swearing in.
Okay. Just explain how the impeachment process will work, what he will be impeached for, and then importantly, how you will get Republicans in the Senate to vote for his eventual removal. Like, tell me that. Use whatever language you want. I don't care.
Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Pac-Man.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the call very much. 617-830-4750. Let's go to the 757 area code. Who's calling from 757 today?
Hello, it's Ernest.
Hey, Ernest, what's going on?
I want to talk to you about your position on nuclear. Now that the IPCC came out and says we got about 12 years to go for this Armageddon with global warming, do we have to really tamper down on nuclear instead of maybe we should go all in instead?
Okay, I'm not for all in on nuclear, so that part I'm clear on. I will tell you what my position is, though, in a sort of more intermediate way on nuclear. I'm okay now. So let me give you the logistical restriction first. It takes a while to get new nuclear capacity online. Okay, so that's something that we have to think about. It's not like we decide today to do something with nuclear, and in a month or a year we're generating power, right? It takes a while to get new supply on. But I would be open to using nuclear as a bridge to get off of fossil fuels and to renewables if, and these are some really big ifs, number one, it comes with the immediate removal of subsidies on dirty fossil fuels as the nuclear supply comes online. And number two, it's part of the plan from the get-go that this is only temporary, this is only a bridge, and renewables and green energy must be developed within a very particular amount of time. Okay, so I understand the risks of nuclear. I also do understand that at this point, if we built new nuclear, we would be using very different standards than were used earlier in the 20th century, and that as a bridge, I'm open to it. But I am not an all-in on nuclear guy.
Well, what I have to counter with is that we can just do like a mass production sort of nuclear, make it modular, make it small, and then mass produce it as much as possible. That way we can get down on cost and standardize the safety and make sure that this reactor is so easy.
Okay, sure, but I would still favor not going to nuclear for the long term and having to deal with disposal and all sorts of other issues, and just going to something that doesn't have to be developed to be safe. It simply is safe systemically at its core.
We do have things like on the edge of ready to be pushed out, like molten salt reactors.
I'm not familiar with that, but I'll research it.
Yeah, molten salt reactors would be the best replacement. We can make them modular, and then we can just simply have them run off of the nuclear waste that we already have. So we don't have to make any new fuel. We can use it as a solution to actually deal with the toxic waste problem we already have.
Okay, I don't know enough about it to say whether you're representing it fairly or not, but I will research it and comment when I feel I've got a firm enough grasp of it.
A channel you can look into is Gordon McDowell. He has plenty of resources on this.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him. You could be recommending someone who's wacky or someone who's very, very insightful on the matter. I will check it out. I really appreciate the call. Thank you for calling in. Let's go to, where do we want to go next? Let's go to the 631 area code. Caller from 631. Who's this?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, who's this?
Good afternoon, Mr. Peckman. This is Tim from Forgotten Millennials. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm going to be, short and to the point. I wanted to get your stance on the Syria pullout, and if you were in any line with, Rachel Maddow and a lot of other left-wing commentators and wanting to stay in Syria.
I couldn't tell you what other people are saying because, quite frankly, I don't really watch anything. So I would be taking your word as to what the position of others is. So here's my position on Syria. I am generally speaking against the military intervention that the United States has chosen to do in the region for a variety of different reasons. The reasons are moral, the reasons are economic, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. That being said, I want to know what the actual motivations are when we make decisions to either send or pull troops out of any particular place. Both the timing and motivations of Donald Trump's decision are suspect, and we've seen how they connect to Jim Mattis leaving, Chief of Staff John Kelly saying he prevented Trump from doing this for a while. We've seen how this ties into the Kurds and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Putin. So I think that the only real serious position to have on Syria is a multifaceted one that accounts not only for what would we like in a vacuum, but that sort of accounts for the political realities of what's going on as well.
Right. Did you agree with Obama's move back to pull out of, Afghanistan and the Middle East back then?
Generally speaking, I did agree with scaling down those wars. Now, you can make the argument that once the circumstances were at a particular level progression or at a particular point in time, that in the short term, some of those decisions could be connected to flare-ups in violence or deleterious effects. But generally speaking, as I've said, I am generally against the interventions that the United States has done in the region.
Okay. And kind of just going off of what you said before, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, by the way, that you don't watch anything. How do you, get your information or gather information for your show? And,
I read.
Where do you look?
I read.
So what do you read? You read
endless sources. I mean, I've got, I'm reading everything from news reporting, from just basic, Associated Press wire services to investigative journalism done by everybody from the New York Times and the Washington Post to all sorts of smaller outlets. And then, I read the opinion of several hundred people who are op-ed people that I follow on Twitter. So I kind of start with wire services, I go to larger media outlets, and then I go to analysts and commentators. All right, thank you for the call, Tim. Tim the Millennial or something like that was his name. Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you to everybody that called in. We'll take more calls next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's get into audience questions for the first time in 2019. 2019, we're already seeing a lot of changes from 2018 politically. Democrats have been sworn in and taken control of the House. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. We already are seeing investigations ramp up. We are seeing bills get passed to reopen the government, despite the fact that Republicans and Trump are not going to even consider doing that on the basis of a democratically passed bill. So a lot of the questions today sort of relate to the next steps in the current regime. The first question is, hey, David, will anybody in the Trump family flip and start cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation? I think the answer is basically no. With the exception that, so I'm trying to, I don't know offhand the full family tree of the Trump child spouses and that sort of thing. I know that Don Jr. now is dating that current or former Fox News anchor Kimberly Guilfoyle. So he has, there's his ex-wife who's floating around out there as what I would imagine a possible more likely person to flip and start cooperating with Mueller. That's a possibility if there was pressure applied to her to try to figure out what Don Jr. was up to, although the law around sort of spousal incrimination may make it so that she doesn't really feel the pressure. That's a possibility. I don't really see it as particularly likely because there is this, with Trump, there's this unending loyalty until you say anything even mildly critical of him. And then all of a sudden you're like the worst person. Michael Cohen's a good example of this. Manafort has been thrown under the bus. The entire thing. We sort of know how it works. And it does seem like within family, at least so far, we haven't seen that breakdown where Trump flips on a family member. But what I think is new in 2019 is that we've not seen Donald Trump operate as president yet when he doesn't control every element of government. He has now lost the House, and a Trump president without control of the House, at this point, who even knows what the full number of investigations is going to be that we see Democrats in the House undertake to try to figure out what exactly went down with Donald Trump. That could change things. And just because we've not seen the flipping on family before, we could see that. One other thing, Trump is clearly capable of throwing his family under the bus. We found out that in the aftermath of the breaking news of the Trump Tower meeting, which Donald Trump Jr. was a big player in, Trump got involved himself in drafting that bogus statement that was published, which was riddled with lies, we now know retrospectively, about the Trump Tower meeting. And there are numerous reports that he was just absolutely furious with Don Jr. And that actually correlates with just bigger picture history of the Trump family stuff, that Trump and Don Jr. have not always gotten along. So I think that if you are going to see an immediate family member, not like an ex-family member or someone by marriage, if you're going to see an immediate family member flip, and we start to see a divergence in the public paths of whether they're on the same page or not, it would be Trump Sr., Donald Trump, and Don Jr. I think that's the most likely. Beyond that, I mean, you know, I want to sort of mention Jared Kushner because he is the golden boy for Donald Trump, but it's not, you know, what you would call a blood relative. And if there were to be someone else, if it really got ugly, where you would see them take sort of opposing positions in this entire thing, maybe it would be Jared Kushner. Send me your thoughts. Am I way off here? Is there someone? I mean, people might say Tiffany. She clearly hates Trump already. She may just be out of the public spotlight, and I don't know that she would even really know anything such that she would be a target to flip. So I would say Don Jr., Don Jr.'s ex-wife, Don Jr., Jared Kushner, sort of in that order. Next question today from the audience. Hey, David, what would happen if Donald Trump were to not accept a primary or general election defeat and try to declare himself as dictator? Listen, I understand that people point to Donald Trump having said, look at what the Chinese president did, removing term limits for himself. That's something maybe we could look at in the future. There are these sort of little data points that we could look at when it comes to Trump trying to remain in power. But I think it's important in the same way that when the right said Obama is going to declare martial law and try to suspend the 2016 election and remain in power indefinitely or whatever, there was nothing backing up that that was something President Obama was even considering doing. It was just bogus conspiracy talk. And along the same lines, I think that we shouldn't really entertain this stuff in a serious manner with Donald Trump either, because as depraved as the Republican Party has been, as much as they've stood aside and allowed Donald Trump to get away with so much day after day after day, I don't see any path to Republicans or Democrats standing by and allowing even the possibility of Donald Trump doing something like this. If Donald Trump is primaried and he loses, yes, he will make all sorts of allegations. I just don't see any way that they succeed in holding up the results of a Trump loss in the primary if that were to happen. If Donald Trump loses the 2020 general election and alleges that there are irregularities or whatever else, I just don't see any way in which politically it's allowed to happen. And even if Donald Trump attempted whatever kind of funny business you can imagine, I don't think he has, quote, the generals, as he likes to say, to back him up. And ultimately, I think that if Donald Trump were to try to retain power despite a loss, it would sort of depend on the military to go along with it. And I just don't see it, because despite the president being the commander in chief of the military, we've seen the generals speak out when they see Trump doing his nonsense and doing things that he shouldn't be doing. So I just don't think there's any way that it happens. I don't even think it's really a worthy thing to go into too much, because then we start to sound sort of like the people who were saying Obama will declare martial law. If I'm wrong, if I'm missing something, let me know and I'll reconsider. Hey, David, is there an advantage to Democrats announcing presidential runs earlier? Well, there's two ways to answer that question. Is there an advantage within the Democratic primary to the Democrats that announce early, like Elizabeth Warren? And then there's the kind of bigger picture question, which is, are Democrats better off starting their primary earlier rather than later? Now, it's not really starting earlier. Like, that ship has sailed, because this is when we start to see typically about a year, a year and 9 months before the election. That's usually when you start to see the exploratory committees and you have some early candidates. So it's not actually early. It sort of feels maybe like it is, because a very prominent Democrat in Elizabeth Warren has said, basically, I'm forming an exploratory committee, and this is something that I'm interested in doing. So I think the answer is it depends, unfortunately. If there is a particularly ugly primary, and despite starting early, it's not resolved who the nominee is going to be any earlier, that may be damaging to Democrats overall. Okay, so we'll answer the macro question first. If early announcements, California moving their primary up in the 2020 election cycle, which we've also talked about, the restructuring of the superdelegate process, if all of these circumstances lead to the winner of the Democratic primary being determined earlier, I do think that that is net better for Democrats in the general election. It does allow for Trump or whoever is the eventual Republican nominee to have more time to attack that person. But I still think it's a net benefit because you more quickly move to the message for the 2020 general election. Now, if the DNC screws it up, if Democrats screw it up, which they well could, they screw up stuff all the time, then it's not going to be particularly beneficial. So at the macro level, I think resolving the Democratic nominee earlier would be beneficial, all else being equal. Then let's look at the micro. Within the Democratic primary, are you better off if you announce early? I don't think it really makes a difference as long as you're not announcing too late, because it's all about name recognition, really. There's a guy who, I mean, this kind of explains it. I think it's Delaney, Maryland congressman, I think, and this is part of the problem. He announced in 2018. I barely know a thing about him. I researched him when he announced. I didn't find him particularly compelling or interesting. He's been in this thing for a long time. Elizabeth Warren announces, and she's getting the lion's share of the attention because she has more name recognition and is more prominent. So I actually don't think within a reasonable range that there's much of an advantage to announcing early. The exception to this is the question mark around Bernie. And some of the folks who are close to Bernie that I spoke to in 2018 actually said to me, we are considering whether we take damage, whether we are at a disadvantage, so to speak, if Bernie plans to run, but Elizabeth Warren announces first, because they are, the two of them, the most progressive senators in the Senate at this time. So that is an open question for me. And I do think that if Bernie is going to run, he should not wait more than another month or two before announcing, because otherwise you do let Elizabeth Warren get sort of established as the progressive senator who is in the race. And then I think Bernie is coming from behind. Beyond that, I think that it's name recognition. Joe Biden, as someone who is not in there as an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders, if he announced next month, or he announced in June, I don't think it makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things. If you disagree with my take on either of these elements, the macro of the Democratic primary versus the general election, and the micro of the Democratic primary, let me know, and we can do a follow-up next week or whenever. Great bonus show for you today. China is going to be landing on the far side of the moon. Single-use foam has been banned in New York City businesses as of January 1st. And also interesting recruiting tactics being employed by the British Army. We will talk about all of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get access to the bonus show by becoming a member. Sign up at www.joinpacman.com. This is 2020 is a coupon code, which will save you 40%. You can also become a patron at least the $5 a month level. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Don't miss the bonus show. It's great. Overhyped, as someone said, but worth the price of membership or patronage.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.